Hi, I'm John Cuddeback.
And I'm Sophia Cuddeback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
And raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship.
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live,
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then the Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us.
Okay, my talk is entitled Being Born in the Home. So before I say anything else, I just want to clarify, this is not about home birth versus hospital birth. Although, as I was preparing this talk, I realized there is much that can be said about home birth and hospital birth in the context of the way I'm looking at what does it mean to be born in the home. However, that's not the topic of this talk. If people want to draw me out on that, we'll have question and answer period, so we'll go ahead and leave it with that. I will also, as I start, kind of share with you or betray my personal vanity that when John and I discussed the topic for the day, and John said, well, you take care of the being born, the child part, and I'll take care of the elderly part. Interiorly, I thought, ugh, it's kind of, I get the boring part of the day because being born is such a common occurrence. I mean, children are always coming into the world. We all have contact with them one way or other. It's going to be hard to say anything very original. John gets the dying part, which is not talked about as much, so he gets to be really scintillating and novel without even trying, and I get the boring part. But actually, as I started preparing for my presentation, I had the experience that we so often have, that when we look at something familiar, that's very familiar to us with new eyes, that often it not only yields new insight, but the experience of the insight is so deep and rich, partially because it's new, but very much because it's actually something very familiar to us. And so we experience the joy of discovering that something that's already our own has this added depth and richness. So I'm actually very excited to share with you the fruits of some of these thoughts. So I'm just going to give you a little brief overview of how I want to approach this and what we're going to be doing in my talk, and then I'll get started. So first, I'm just going to briefly restate the nature of the household, and then I'd like to consider the needs of an infant. So we're going to be primarily talking about, or at the beginning of my presentation, I'd like to primarily just consider the infant. Now, obviously, a child has a much more protracted period than infancy. We'll say kind of the first year of their life. But I think a lot of what the needs that infants express, it kind of teaches us the core of what we then continue to do as we continue to parent. And I think it actually teaches us something very important about who we are and how we relate to everyone, the exercise of looking at the infant in the home. So I'm just going to just briefly restate the nature of the household and then consider the needs of the infant to assess the fittingness of the household to meet those needs. And then I want to look a little bit more closely from a slightly different perspective at the needs of children to better understand the far-reaching impact of the way we meet those needs, the impact that it has in the future for the child and for ourselves. And then finally, I want to ask the question, what does thinking or talking about this mean for all of us? If it's something that's only relevant to people who are bouncing an infant over their shoulder right now, then it's a very limited value. But I think that actually there's much that we can draw from the consideration that actually teaches us a tremendous amount beyond simply the moment of an infant in its first year. Okay, so I don't want to alarm anyone. It looks like I have a lot of pages, but I actually printed it in larger print so that I could track nicely, so don't be alarmed. Okay, so first of all, just to kind of redefine the household as a context in which we will be considering these things, the household is the natural place for the flourishing of all of its members. John mentioned what we mean when we say flourishing. To be more specific, or to kind of be a little bit more detailed with what we mean by that, I want to say the household is the natural place for the flourishing of all of its members, particularly by meeting the spiritual and physical by meeting the spiritual needs of its members by and through their material daily needs. What it takes to meet these needs provides the perfect context for forging relationships. So another way of describing the household could be the ideal environment for forging relationships. Making the home a good place to start life is to make a good home, a good household. This is why it is actually very important to take a closer look at what babies really need. What does it take to make a good start? So often, maybe because infants are nonverbal, we're often very subconsciously consider them human beings in potency, the not really human yet. I know it's kind of shocking. We're a very pro-baby community, but it is funny how we tend to think of them as kind of a different type of human being than we are. And obviously there are reasons for that, but it's good to be conscious of that distinction that we make. We wait for children to be able to start to show us, and by that I mean tell us, who they really are. I think this can often prevent us from appreciating how critical the question, how can we make a home that is suited to the needs of an infant, really is. When we make a place that's conducive to the flourishing of an infant, we learn to make a place where we each can flourish. Indeed, the very act of making such a place in a very important way constitutes our own flourishing. I think this will become more apparent as we consider what the material needs of an infant are and how we meet them. Putting aside the question of the fully formed rationality, which obviously infants do not have fully formed rationality, I think to consider the infant is to consider man in a concentrated or distilled form, particularly when considering the spiritual needs of the infant. When we consider an infant, there are so many things that we learn about what it means to be human that later on become blurred or even completely hidden, like vulnerability, dependence, interdependence, receptivity, and so forth. I think this is why, of course, the manger at Christmas is a constant revelation that irresistibly draws us year after year. We come and we encounter the Christ child in the manger because we're actually looking to discover something about ourselves, and something is very much revealed there, something that maybe we as adults become slightly separated from because our needs have changed. The greatest human need of the infant is to be seen and affirmed as good. It is good that you are alive. For the very young child, bodily needs are always accompanied by an emotional component. Precisely because of their not yet fully formed rational power, their emotional needs are experienced and expressed in their material needs. For example, when they're hungry, they cry in distress. They actually experience their hunger as a distressing thing. Now, we do have several low blood sugar members in our family, and as adults, they still experience hunger as a distressing thing. But for the most part, adults experience that differently from infants. Meeting the bodily needs of an infant is often to be meeting an emotional need simultaneously. Meeting material needs provides the opportunity to see the child and to meet spiritual needs at the same time. John likes to use the example of changing diapers, which requires even the busiest of parents to have skin-to-skin contact with their child in a position in which it is almost impossible to avoid eye-to-eye contact. Later, when the growing infant is unwilling to undergo the diaper changing ritual, often you start cooing and talking to them to cajole them, bringing you into even more contact. There's so many other bodily needs that invite even the most inexperienced baby handler to interact with the infant in a way that invites a deeper gaze. I just have to share with you, when our oldest daughter was born, I'm the fourth in a child. I'm a fourth child in a family of 10 children, and my husband is the youngest child in his family. And so I just never really thought about it when we had our baby. I just assumed it's no big deal. You just hold the baby, change the baby, whatever. And I didn't find out until much later that when Magdalena was born and the midwife handed the baby to John, he was terrified. He was terrified of breaking her. And then, of course, I'm so delighted to see Daddy with the newborn baby, and it's time to get the baby dressed in those teeny little outfits with her tiny little arms, and he's squeezing it over her head, but he was terrified. He was a good actor. I had no idea. And so this is an example of the most inexperienced baby handler is by the baby's needs just brought into a kind of a contact that all of a sudden makes you be the person in their life that they're looking toward, which your experience doesn't seem to qualify you for that. So it's a beautiful recollection realizing this. A baby's total floppiness is another example. It requires you to wrap your arm around them and cradle them in order to be able to hold their head, and it's usually in a position where you're face to face and watching them. This floppiness also requires a two-hand hold, which requires you to hold them with both hands and prohibits you from doing anything else while you hold them. Thank goodness for this, or I probably would have totally multitasked during my children's infancy. Every time I had a baby, 6 times, I would have to resign myself again to the two-hand hold period. And it was really a resignation. I'm not going to get anything done. Thank goodness for the baby's floppiness. Nursing babies ensure that the newest member of the human race gets to nestle with its mother repeatedly throughout the day and the night, providing security and safety. That God designed nursing to release a hormone to both mother and baby that causes both to relax and enter into a deep experience of peace is a sign that from God's perspective, it is indeed necessary and good that mothers spend that kind of time with their babies. It seems to be part of the design. Not being able to walk is another astounding need that brings us face to face with the smallest members of our family. Have you ever thought about that? You know, babies not being able to walk, what that means you have to do with them. Imagine if your infant could walk around the house and you could just call them and they could come. I mean, they can't walk. And so you need to bend down and pick them up, again, bodily contact, to eye level. And so the list goes on. And I'm sure that all of you could fill out this list in a very meaningful way from your own experiences. Whether you are a parent or not, I'm sure you can think of ways in which the very, very young child demands a certain kind of presence from us. Now, when I say the material need provides the opportunity to see the child and to meet spiritual needs at the same time, I very intentionally say provides the opportunity. Because I want to grant that while material needs demand persistent and frequent contact, in themselves, they do not make us look at the child with love and affirm the goodness of their person. That having been said, look at what the persistent need secures for the child. Regular bodily contact does mean something in contrast to no daily contact. And the regular daily contact provides the opportunity, I would even say it provides a persistent reminder to have contact with the child. Imagine if your infant didn't need you, how much more infrequently you would connect with your young child, even if you were really intentional about your household. Think how often the needs of your child interrupt what you are doing and turn you toward them. If they didn't interrupt you, would you turn toward them? So I have this recurring nightmare that I've never particularly connected it to what was going on in my life, but it must have been a very busy time in my life. But I have this recurring nightmare that I arrive somewhere with a child in a car seat, like an infant car seat, and I'm very busy doing whatever it is that I do. And then I realize 3 days later that I forgot to nurse the baby. It's the most awful dream, and I'm sure it's connected to over-busyness. And I wake up thinking, that could never really happen. So thank goodness. But it is interesting to think that if they didn't have that bodily need, we probably would get absorbed and occupied in doing a lot of different things and not realize that we haven't attended to them as they need. While it is easily apparent that the material needs of an infant require constant and frequent attention and presence from us, it's easy for us to miss that their spiritual and emotional needs require the same frequency of attention. So now I'm gonna, whenever I prepare a presentation, I'm a little bit like Bottom in Shakespeare's Midsummer Night Dream. When they're handing out the parts, Bottom says, oh, I can do that part. Oh, I can do that part. Oh, I can do that part. So I'm a little bit enthusiastic that way, and I often volunteer to do things that I actually have no experience in doing. It's an amazing way to learn fast. But John will often remind me, don't talk about things that that are not really your area of expertise. Darn it. I'm a little bit, I've already written it. I'm standing in front of you speaking, so he can't do anything about this. But so I'm going to a little bit depart from that very helpful and appropriate suggestion on his part. And I want to share with you some things that I have gleaned from a psychologist who actually very much utilizes neurological studies of how the brain is formed and preparing ability to have emotional relationships, healthy emotional relationships as adults. And I think this is important. I'd like to share with you some of the things that I've learned. This psychologist, his name is Adam Young. He has a podcast, and I have not listened to all of his podcasts by any stretch of the imagination. The several that I've heard have been very helpful in considering a lot of these relationship issues. But the reason I'd like to point out some of the neurological studies that he quotes is I think neurological reality is very interesting because the way the brain function is this kind of almost meeting that blurs into spiritual realities. So the physical part of our brain that is definitively physical actually does have something, is connected very seamlessly to the rational part of our brain, which is the spiritual power. And so I actually found what he had to say about neurological studies done on the formation of infants to be very interesting and helpful, especially in regards to this question of how the material needs of the child actually invite us to do something that is far greater than simply meeting their material needs. So Adam Young quotes neurological studies that have shown that attunement of the parent to the child, and what he means by attunement is the parent seeing and responding to the emotional need of the child. So actually not just emotional, it can be physical, but remember an infant, the two are blurred for them. They experience both the same. So attunement is the parent seeing and responding to the emotional needs of the child. This attunement during the first year of life forms neurological connections between parts of the brain which will govern how the child will experience himself and the ability that he will have to bond with others in the future. In particular, such attunement produces something called healthy attachment, which is an embodied sense of knowing that I matter to my caregivers and that they want to be in relationship with me. I think this is extraordinary. He's talking about an embodied experience of relationship, which is, relationship is fundamentally a spiritual reality. But there is this thing called healthy attachment, which is very important, and the way we interact with our infants produces this healthy attachment. Let me just find my spot because I don't want to miss anything important. In particular, such attunement produces healthy attachment, which is an embodied sense of knowing that I matter to my caregivers and that they want to be in relationship with me. One of the characteristics of children who are properly attached during the first year of their life is that they grow up in a state of continual relational hopefulness. I mean, this blew me away. Is that not an amazing phrase? Relational hopefulness. He's talking about a neurological reality that actually determines the way they go into future relationships. Adam Young says that where there is healthy attachment, quote, it is built in neurologically that when there is a relational rupture, there is a conviction that the relationship will be quickly restored. That's pretty amazing when you think that looking into your infant's face and responding to their need is actually building a neurological connection that will create a state that in the future, when they have relational ruptures, that they have confidence that the rupture can be quickly healed. That is amazing. I can, later on, if somebody wants, I can tell you what episode that's in and what it's entitled. There are a lot of interesting things in this podcast episode. As I consider that, I can't help but wonder. Now, I know that tonight, later, John is going to be, not tonight, don't worry, we're not keeping here till tonight. In a moment, John's going to be talking to you about dying in the home. Now, specifically what he's talking about is how we receive the elderly in our home and create a place that is suitable to supporting people as they die. But when I was putting this together and thinking about it, I couldn't help but think how this kind of confidence in relationships and a hopefulness in relationships, how that would affect a person when they themselves are dying. So I couldn't help but think that an infant that is, their needs are met in an appropriate kind of way is actually being set up to be able to experience that second birth into eternity in a way that is maybe more peaceful, more beautiful, more confident in a relationship. So I haven't really heard anybody else talk about that, but I can't help but imagine that that would make a difference as we ourselves approach death. Healthy attachment has also been shown to neurologically enable healthy self-regulation of the bodily response to emotional stress, affecting the degree of negative impact of future traumatic situations. I think this would be awesome to give this to my children so that they can weather later traumatic situations. And again, I think how this might affect your own approaching death, the way you bodily experience emotional situations. The studies performed show that the strength of these neurological connections was directly correlated to the degree of attunement. Remember, attunement is seeing and responding to, of the primary caregiver. What they mean by primary caregiver is the one who is consistently and persistently present and responsible for the physical and emotional needs of the child. So again, the neurological connections were directly correlated to the degree of attunement of the primary caregiver, who is consistently and persistently present and responsible for the physical and emotional needs of the child, and its communication to the child. Now, they're talking about the infant in the first year, to the child in nonverbal facial expressions. So this is so amazing when we think about the specific needs of an infant during the first year. Think of how many needs of the infant are to be met in a face-to-face position. This has to happen over and over again in high frequency for these strong neurological connections to occur. This can only adequately happen in a household. Only the committed presence in the home of both mother and father can provide for that frequency throughout the day and night. This is an incredible expression of overlap between spiritual and material needs. The baby expresses distress, spiritual, due to a dirty diaper, material. The parent sees, spiritual, the child's needs and soothes the baby by changing the diaper, material, while all the while cooing to it, spiritual. The baby's diaper is now clean, material, and the parent's interaction has strengthened the dendritic connection, material, between the parts of the brain that will allow the child to form deep, lasting, confident relationships of giving and receiving and to weather future trauma with less damage. Woohoo! Like, this is amazing. Did you have any idea you were doing that? I think that's incredible. I think we get the picture. This is an absolutely amazing design. I had no idea what I was doing for my children when I was changing their diapers. However, I'm confident in what I did know, which was John and I have started a household and we have invited this child into it, and I am responsible for them and must meet their needs in an adequate and loving way. I'm confident that this knowledge helped me to do better what I didn't even know I was doing. I have to admit that when I listen to this podcast and I hear about these neurological studies, which are recent, I feel a little bit shortchanged that when I was raising my infants, nobody was talking about this and I didn't know. But then I realize God gives us the help that we need in the age that we need it. And when I consider when I was raising my infants and I was at home with them, there was nothing else to do but to be with my infants. Now I think mothers of the day that we live in right now have a very unique challenge in technological devices, in particular the cell phone. I just have to share, when you are parenting an infant, especially when it's your first and there is no one else in the house but you and the infant, it is very, very taxing, and it is a very long day. This doesn't mean you're not happy being your mom. It doesn't mean that you don't love your baby. It just means it is a very long day. Now, mothers in the home have the distinct temptation of alleviating that difficulty by being on their phone. It might not even be for bad or vain things. It could be all very practical and necessary. But when we're on a phone, I have to say in my day, the telephone was kind of that version. Because when I was on the phone, my children, who are generally good, but when I would get on the phone, it was like, where did these little demons come from? I think they got really disturbed because I was bodily there, but I was spiritually gone. I was with whoever I was talking to on the phone. It didn't matter that it was corded and attached to the wall. My children sensed that in an amazing way, and they would get really riled up. So the cell phone is really a big issue because even if we're bodily near our child, our person, our being, our attention is here. There have also been studies, which Adam Young doesn't quote, that talk about we are in an age of crisis because young children are actually on devices. And so there is no face-to-face connection with their caregivers, which is actually responsible for building the part of the brain that will allow them to have real and meaningful relationships later. We are in a point of crisis. And so I think it's helpful that the studies have come out now, because the young people who are starting families now need to know these things. You know, it's nice to say your baby will be very happy if you look at them and coo at them. When you hear a scientific study that says your baby's brain is not developing, then somehow you feel like, okay, I got to get serious about this. So even though I'm not an expert in neurological studies, I thought that that was worthwhile sharing because it is a very real reality here. Okay. Okay, so what I would like to just make sure you don't skip something. Okay, another thing that I wanted to point out, that actually as we're talking about mothers today, I did share the thoughts of this presentation with one of my daughters who just said, wow, I don't know if I'd be able to do that. Because it really sounds like what I'm saying is persistent, constant presence of the parent in the home with the child. Now, that sounds incredibly overwhelming because child's physical needs are kind of myriad. But I do want to quote something that Adam Young says, which is very important. He says, securely attached children are not necessarily the infants who are taken up into their mother's arms the most frequently or held the longest, or the children who had parents who played with them the most frequently. Securely attached children are the ones who were hugged when they wanted to be hugged and put down when they wanted to be put down. So again, I think this really underscores it's about seeing the child and their needs. It's not about, well, if I just hold my child all the time, I'll have the perfectly emotionally balanced child. Maybe the child doesn't need to be held. Again, what it's pointing to is we are being called to see the children who are given to us. Okay, so for this consideration to be at all meaningful for anyone other than the parent who's currently bouncing a baby over their shoulder, we have to ask the question, why does this consideration of what babies need, or what does this consideration of what babies need teach me about how I should live as I parent toddlers, high schoolers, adults, or as I am empty nesting or living in a household of one? First of all, I just want to say to those who are currently bouncing an infant over their shoulder, hopefully this reflection will draw your attention back to what you have started by your promise to one another, its magnitude, its impact on the members that you will invite into the household. The household not only provides the context for the awesome work that you will do, it also provides the means by which you will do it, if you will give yourself to the task completely. When your child needs you, you are being given an opportunity to cross the barrier of self, to see the other, and by responding to their material need or spiritual needs, you are making yourself available to the interconnectedness of relationship. Their needs are not a burden, they are an opportunity. Every time we meet their needs, we grow in our own capacity for meaningful relationship. We grow the possibility to be something for another, as well as to learn to let the other be something for us. Remember the frequency and persistence of the needs. Think of the frequency and persistence of our practice of otherness that these needs allow. If we are faithful, it will make us a particular kind of person, a person fit for relationship with our children, with our spouses, with our community, and with our Creator. Further, if we then intentionally choose to structure our household with an eye to which activities are most conducive to meeting the daily needs of its members in this kind of way, then we are truly making our households into a school of love. Now, for those who are no longer exclusively parenting infants, but are also parenting children beyond their infancy, even into adulthood, what is there in this consideration for you now that the dendritic connections that happen in the first year of life are already done forming? This is what I said to myself. Oh, darn, I missed it. While the scientific studies are a fascinating confirmation of the importance of attentive parental presence in critical neurological development, the more important insight is that infants need to be seen and responded to. The infant is a distilled form of the man. There is an unbroken continuity between the infant and the man. The neurological need to be seen and responded to may be done after the first year, although there is a lot of research being done now discovering that the brain remains very plastic. So it's possible that the most important connections are made in the first year, but the brain is constantly making new connections and capable of making new connections. So even though the critical neurological development may be done, the children still have the same need to be seen and responded to. Your children of any age, even adults, need to know that you see them, and by your response that you affirm their goodness. As children grow, the connection between their physical needs and their spiritual need widens. And to care for them physically often does not simultaneously meet their spiritual needs, although it often provides a natural entree to spiritual needs. We may need to work harder to catch their eyes so they can see that we're responding. And our response to them needs to have the facial expression that the infant needs, but now it also needs to have the verbal expression that the more capable intellect of our growing children requires. We need to continue to shape our homes so that they are a reliable place where our children of every age know they will be seen. Are we providing an environment that allows encounter? Do our children experience that they are a meaningful part of something bigger than their own spiritual needs or material needs? And even though they don't need to have their diaper changed, I think that our children always need to have the physical contact of a hug. If you think about the sheer volume of physical contact that is occasioned by the needs of an infant, it makes you wonder and reconsider the importance of continuing habits of appropriate age-related physical contact. I have a daughter who is about 6 inches taller than myself now, and she's about that much more intelligent than I am, and just an impressive, imposing person. And it's a little bit awkward for me to give her a hug, because on a hugger, it's like not around her shoulders, it's around her waist, and I kind of fit under her arm. But when I started hugging her as an adult, I was shocked to discover how she just melted into my arms. And she loves it when I hug her. So it's a little bit awkward when we sit on the couch and we hug. I feel like I'm the baby and she's the parent, but I'm hugging her and she loves it. So anyway, it's a good thing to consider. Physical contact is also, in adult children, can also be tricky because there are now a lot of emotional connections with physical contact. So again, an invitation is to first see and then to respond to what they need. Finally, I want to ask, what does this consideration offer to those who are in a household of one? So this can be people who are unmarried or people whose children are no longer in the home or their spouse has passed on. And reflecting on the very young and what kind of care they require in the household, it struck me that in order to take care of the young in a way that truly meets their deepest human need to be seen and affirmed, we have to become a certain kind of person. We have to become the kind of person who is ready to see and respond. When we become that kind of person, we are flourishing. The care of the very young teaches us this. A woman once asked John and myself in a LifeCraft encounter, "What do you do when no one needs you anymore?" These questions are always complex, and it's always best to pause and carefully consider before deciding if you can answer them. That's John's approach. I immediately had a very strong response to that question, which I think, even though it was quick, is true. My gut conviction, the response was, someone needs you. So clearly this woman was experiencing that the people who needed her at one point no longer need her. Someone needs you. Of course, it's easier when that someone is given to you to be part of your household and that person is an unending basket of obvious needs. You might have to look a little harder, but someone needs you. In the meantime, are you practicing having a heart that is ready to see and respond? Just a little example of that is I'm Ukrainian, and our Ukrainian Christmas tradition is to celebrate Christmas on Christmas Eve. And ever since I was a very young child, my parents always set an extra place at the table. And that was called the place for the unexpected guest. And we have continued that tradition in our home. And we have always set a place for the unexpected guest. Sometimes it has to be in the middle of the table if it's getting too crowded, or on the sideboard, but it's always on the table. And most of my children are grown now into adulthood, and we've never had the unexpected guest. About 4 years ago, a young man showed up at our door to bring us something, not in our close family circle, but a man who was really craving household. And he showed up to bring us some Christmas cookies he baked, and we were in the middle of our formal Christmas Eve dinner. And we said, why don't you come and sit down? And there was a place at the table that was set with plate and napkins and fork, set ready to welcome the unexpected guest. Finally, after, I don't know, for me it would be 45 years of the empty place for the unexpected guest, we had an unexpected guest. He shows up every year on Christmas Eve. So that plate was ready for the unexpected guest. So in the same way, what are we doing to prepare our hearts to receive that person who needs us when they come into our life? In a household that does not have the full natural context of a household, it takes a greater kind of intentionality. You have to become that kind of person by intentionally choosing it and practicing it. You become the example of the kind of intentionality that those who live in an intact natural household need to be practicing, that we often get distracted from. Some ways to practice this kind of disposition is to have an active prayer life of contemplation, the kind of prayer that looks to see the Lord and asks to be seen by the Lord. It is an exercise in being the child that is also the adult. Practice the open heart of seeing those who are not formally presenting themselves to you in need, like the teller in the grocery store and so forth. And I just want to say a word about seeing and responding. It's important that we're responding to the need that the person is expressing. So there was also a study done of a baby interacting with its mother, but through a video camera. So the mother is on a video speaking to the child through the screen, and the mother sees the child's responses on her screen. Then and everything is going fine, the baby is happily interacting, and then they did a slight delay of the mother's response to the child. And very quickly, the child became very agitated and unhappy. The mother was still responding to the child, but because of the delay, the response was no longer the right response to what the child was doing, asking for in that moment. So the adequate seeing is very important, and then the response that's appropriate. So if you're talking to the teller at the grocery store, of course, she's just shared with you she has a dysfunctional relationship with her father. You don't need her, she doesn't need you to be telling her, you need to fix your relationship with your dad, because all she's really asking of you is just to be smiled at and affirmed that it's good that she's exists. It's always about the other, not about you. Look for ways to contribute to the members of the community, start a book group or a prayer group, or if there's a young family in the community that you could help with childcare or an occasional meal. Is there a young man or a woman that you could mentor? I have unmarried friends who share that it's hard to avoid selfish habits when you don't have the built-in curb of children. The reality is, parents might live at the service of their children or their household, but that does not mean that they are not selfish. They might have the built-in opportunity to practice selflessness, but it's only an opportunity if you don't choose it. In another podcast, Adam Young quotes neurological scientist Kurt Thompson, whose research focuses on how relationships with our parents affect the shaping of our brain. Kurt Thompson says, I quote this, I think it's very important for all of us to remember as we're working hard to grasp concepts and to make our homes into something. He says, we can grow up in homes where the food finds the table, the money finds the college fund, and the family even finds the church on Sunday, but somehow our hearts remained undiscovered by the two people we most need to know us, our parents. We all have to choose We all have to become intentional about the people we become. Thoughtfully making a home suitable to welcome children into the world can help us do that. If we practice making this kind of place for the very young in our home, whether the very young are in our home or not, perhaps when the time comes for us to receive the very old into our home, we will already have a place prepared for them in our habits and in our hearts. Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.